There are people who have been here for decades, who have worked hard, who don't have criminal histories, and they still don't have a way to get status. If you're not able to get a work permit and you've got an employer who's telling you you have to do this or I'm going to call ICE, and you're seeing masked people pulling people off the streets, yeah, that's a really scary and real threat. And Alaska, with our extreme isolation, is a place where people can be really vulnerable to exploitation. These are not rapists and murderers. They're people that ICE knows where they are because they're in some kind of process, and ICE needs to hit their 3,000 goal, which is the problem with these kinds of targets, that how are you going to hit 3,000 people in a day? You're going to pick the people that are easiest to find, which are the people that are already in some kind of a process.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Anna Taylor, Executive Director of the Alaska Institute for Justice. Alaska Institute for Justice is a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the rights of everyone living in Alaska, regardless of immigration status. Anna is the daughter of a father who was a legislator in the Vermont State House and a mother who was a veterinarian. Anna got interested in law while living in Ghana, West Africa, and initially wanted to work in international law. But an experience in law school convinced her that she could do more good by helping folks navigate our broken American immigration system. Her work at AIJ has largely revolved around helping survivors of abuse acquire legal status in the United States. Anna Taylor, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So you are the Executive Director of Alaska Institute for Justice.
Yes.
And you became the Executive Director fairly recently.
Yeah, it's an interesting time to be the Executive Director.
Yeah. I want to talk about you, but before we do that, let's just talk a little bit about Alaska Institute for Justice. It's been around since 2005.
Yes. So we started as the Alaska Immigration Justice Project in 2005, and we were created to help immigrants get status, essentially, or to get more stable status. In 2007, we started the Language Interpreter Center, which worked with the court system and makes things more accessible for people who are limited English proficient. So trains interpreters and then has an online platform where you can request interpretation, and also does translations. And then our most recent program is the Alaska Climate Justice Program, which works with 10 tribes in Western Alaska to do whatever the tribes need done to increase their capacity to deal with climate change. So I came up through the immigration program. I started out as a staff attorney down in Juneau, and just kind of worked my way up. I was a staff attorney and then supervising attorney and then deputy director, and now I'm executive director.
You used to have immigration in your title.
Yes.
You're working on the Climate Justice Project in Western Alaska with tribes, so those are obviously not immigrants. But
Correct.
I'm curious, do you guys do any other legal services that are not for immigrants?
No, we have the immigration program that's immigrant focused, and then we have the climate justice program, which is working with tribes.
Got it. Let's go back to you. So Where are you from?
All over. So I was born in Colorado, but we didn't stay there very long. Bounced around a bit and then spent some formative years in Minnesota from about 3rd grade to 12th grade. And then my parents moved to Vermont and I followed them there, and they're still there. So when I go quote unquote home, I go to Vermont. And I graduated from the University of Vermont and majored in anthropology and history.
So majored in anthropology and history at the University of Vermont. Why did you get interested in law?
We'd done quite a bit of traveling, and I studied abroad for 9 months in Ghana when I was in undergrad, and I had read about some work that international human rights attorneys were doing, and so I thought I could get somebody to pay me to travel the world and save the world, and so I went to law school thinking I would be an international human rights attorney. But then I took a clinic my last year of law school, and the case that they gave us to kind of get client exposure was an asylum case. And that seemed like a really good way to continue to work with people from all over the world, but have a more concrete impact on people's lives. It seemed like the international human rights courts were issuing these great decisions, and the countries would just be like, not do anything. Whereas immigration was a way to have a concrete impact on someone's life and still work with people from all over the world. So I was really interested in asylum work. And then I went down to the border and worked for a nonprofit down there for 5 months with detained immigrants doing asylum work, and then got the job at AIJ. And that kind of moved me from doing straight asylum work into immigration and asylum.
So you were on the border with Mexico doing immigration work there, and then you got hired to come work in Juneau?
Yep. Yeah, I went from one border to the other.
That's interesting. So were you specifically looking for jobs in Alaska, or how did you find it?
My mom emailed me. I'm an only child, so my mom, my parents get involved in my life sometimes. But in almost all the places we've lived have always been on the northern border. I like winters. I like mountains. Texas was getting too hot, so I wanted to be someplace cooler with 4 seasons. And the job was in Juneau, and I like small towns, and so the culture and the location was a good fit. And I wanted to do immigration law.
So per the press release announcing that you were taking over as the executive director, it says that AIJ has served over 7,000 immigrants in the past 20 years.
Yep.
So it seems like a lot, but were you taking care of asylum seekers in Juneau?
Not a lot of asylum. I was doing more domestic violence cases. So people who had married U.S. citizens and come to the United States, and then the U.S. citizens were abusive. So working on getting green cards for those people, naturalization cases, and those would be cases where there wasn't necessarily domestic violence involved. Family petitions, so people who had healthy relationships and wanted to bring family members, kids, spouses to the United States, things like that. So it wasn't necessarily asylum, it was all kinds of immigration cases.
Gotcha. And were you really just serving folks in Southeast Alaska?
Mostly, yeah. If we got a case in Southeast Alaska, I would handle it. If that wasn't enough for my caseload, I would take cases in other places in Alaska.
How many offices do you have, and where are they?
We have the Anchorage office as our main office, and then we have the satellite office in Juneau, which has a paralegal in it.
Okay, so just the 2 offices.
Yep.
Got it. When did you move to Anchorage?
2018. So I was in Juneau for about 4 years.
Okay. You started in 2014?
Yes. Yep.
So talk about how the work has changed over the past 10 years.
Yeah. Immigration has always been demanding in that you have to be very detail oriented, and there's never been room for mistakes, but that's even more true now. The consequences are just exponentially more grave now. So, for example, in the past, when we submitted an application, if it got denied, usually that just meant that the application got denied. Now we're looking at scenarios where if you submit an application and gets denied, the person gets put into removal proceedings. Or we've had people get picked up when they're going in to do their fingerprints or when they're doing their interviews. So
that's this year.
Yeah, that's more.
So prior to this year, that didn't happen.
Prior to this year, that did not happen. No. So we just have to be more aware of the risks, more aware of making sure that we're dotting all of our I's and crossing all of our T's, and making sure that we're aware of everything and not making any mistakes.
Let's go prior to 2025.
Okay.
It's my understanding that our immigration system was not easy to navigate prior to 2025, that the immigration system has often been said that it's broken.
Yeah.
So I guess before we talk about 2025, just talk about the difficulties of getting permanent residency in the United States.
Yeah. I mean, it's particularly when you're working with survivors of crime, those are applications that take a lot of attorney time, which is, I say that not to complain about like, oh, it takes all my time, but I say that in that it makes it harder for survivors to find attorneys. If you have to pay a attorney that is charging for their time, then that makes those cases more expensive, which costs more resources for people that don't have a lot of resources. And then the issue that's always been an issue is the processing times have always been really long, and they're getting longer. They just keep getting longer. If I have somebody who is a survivor of human trafficking and they come into my office and I say, well, it's going to take you a year to get your visa and you're not going to have a work permit in the meantime, what is that person supposed to do for a year? And now that time is up to, I think, a little bit over 2 years. So those processing times have always been long. They're getting longer. And there's nothing that people can access when they're undocumented. They can't get any kind of public benefits to tide them over. So if you can't get a work permit, you can't get public benefits. How do you support yourself and your kids if you're a survivor of domestic violence? And part of the abuse has been that you can't access your resources. So these are rights that people are supposed to have to help keep them safe. But if it takes 6 months to a year to access them, you're in a really tough position for that amount of time. And that's always been true. It's always taken a long time to get access to those benefits. It's also just always been a really complicated system. And the filing fees have always been excessive. They have recently changed it so that the filing fees for humanitarian applications, they are waived. They don't have to pay them. But when I first started practicing, for a survivor of domestic violence to apply for a green card, it cost about $1,000. And again, how do you get $1,000 if you don't have a bank account and you don't have a work permit and your abuser has taken all of your financial resources and you don't have any public benefits, you have no resources? How do you then come up with $1,000 to pay for a green card so that in 6 months you can have a work permit? It just puts people in a really unfortunate position.
Are people still getting approved?
They are. It's getting harder, but they are. Yep.
So you corrected me earlier when I asked about asylum seekers in Juneau, and you said, well, you're mainly dealing with domestic violence type cases. Mm-hmm. Is that the typical case that you guys deal with? Is that the most common case in Alaska, is folks who are brought over as part of a romantic relationship and it's abusive, and then they are trying to get out and they don't have a U.S. passport?
That's kind of our bread and butter. So we have federal grants for now, knock on wood, that make it so that we can provide services for survivors for free for the survivor. And so those cases are usually, yes, somebody has come with either a fiancé visa from somebody that they met abroad and then they came to the United States and the person ended up being abusive, or they came with a tourist visa and then they met somebody and they got married and then the relationship was abusive. Those are pretty typical.
And I think a stereotype for folks who are super knowledgeable in this issue is that if you marry an American, you become an American. Like, that's an easy way to become an American citizen, is get married to an American. Is it not that simple?
No. Yeah, it would be nice if it was, here's your marriage license and a green card. That is one way that you can get a green card. But there's a process right now for healthy relationships, one where the U.S. citizen is involved and participates. I'd say they're taking probably about a year. If there's domestic violence involved and we're doing it without the U.S. citizen, they're taking around 4 years to get the actual green card. So there is still a process. You have to get a medical exam to make sure that there's no medical issues. You have to pay a bunch of filing fees. You have to do criminal background checks. There's a whole vetting process they go through and make sure that you don't have any reasons that have been determined to prevent somebody from getting a green card. So that can be criminal history or immigration history if somebody's crossed the border without permission, things like that.
So I'll just make up a hypothetical.
Yep.
Say a woman meets a man in Alaska online. They date virtually or whatever. Mm-hmm. She moves here to marry him. Mm-hmm. It's a violent, unhappy relationship. And let's say she gets away and she contacts you, and you're saying it takes like 4 years for her. What are her options? Well, I mean, when she shows up and says, hey, I'm in a really abusive relationship. I left my home country. I don't have any money. Let's say she has a kid.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, what's the typical path?
Yeah. If it's a crisis, if we're the first person they come to, we're usually not. Usually the first place they go is the shelter.
And the shelter contacts you.
Yes, exactly. So the first thing I would do is want to make sure that they have a safe place to sleep that night.
If the shelter contacts you, do you generally feel like that need has been met?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. The shelters are, we have a good relationship with the shelters throughout the state. Mm-hmm. And they do things like see if there's any way that they could apply for, if not public benefits, maybe some faith-based organizations will have some kind of charities or things like that where they can get some kind of food or rental assistance or something like that is not necessarily government assistance. But at that point, you start the application. The shelters have advocates that can help with gathering documents. We lean on them a lot because gathering documents can mean things like getting a copy of the marriage certificate or getting a copy of any protective orders or police reports. And those are really hard to get if you don't know how to navigate U.S. systems.
Or maybe don't speak English very
Yeah,
well.
exactly. Or you're limited English proficient and you don't know how to navigate American systems. That's a really complicated thing. And so the advocates of the shelters are crucial for helping get those documents. So then we put together the application and get it sent out. We do apply, if we can, we apply for a work permit so that people can get a work permit while the application is in process. The work permit still takes a while. They can take 10 to 12 months, but at least it's something that's faster than the green card. And then we just, we stay in touch. We'll work with the survivor and the shelters to make sure that they are aware of this isn't taking a long time because the survivor's dragging their feet. It's taking a long time because USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, is taking a long time, and do the best we can to kind of help things along while we're waiting for work permits.
Do you see more folks from a particular country?
Well, probably about half of my clients were Spanish speaking, so Mexico, Central America. I speak Spanish though, so that's where my clientele is going to skew. We also see quite a few people from the Philippines, but after that, I mean, Alaska's super diverse, so we see people from all over the world.
And has the way that you communicate with new clients changed over the past couple of years?
Yes, I mean, people are more scared, and we do the reassuring that we can, but there's only so much we can do, and we can talk about Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights. Your right to remain silent, your right to be free from an unreasonable search and seizure. But those rights are only relevant if they're respected. So people are more scared. There's only so much reassurance we can do.
Have you noticed a change in the numbers of people contacting you? Do you think people are even afraid to contact you?
We're still getting quite a few calls. I think we've been around a while, so we've got good word of mouth. And we try to be flexible about things like using the shelters or using trusted sources so that people feel comfortable coming to us.
So there was an article in the ADN today. It was a repost from the Washington Post about the Trump administration's mass deportation campaign. Some sort of alarming numbers in it was that his deputy chief of staff, Stephen Miller, said that he was really looking for 3,000 immigration arrests per day. This is so that they can reach their goal of 1 million deportations in Trump's first year up the second term. I don't think that number is possible because we're approaching the end of his first year. The article itself said that this 3,000 arrests per day is not being met. They're doing 1,900 per day, at the highest number. I guess, do you feel the change in the new administration in terms of, are we seeing those sorts of deportations happening in Alaska? Can you comment any on that?
Yeah, we are seeing more enforcement actions. We've seen people get picked up at interviews. We've seen people get picked up at biometrics appointments, which we never saw before this year. And I say that not to discourage people from going through the process, but it's just really important that you talk to somebody who's an immigration attorney who knows what they're doing and is keeping an eye on these things and is aware of how risky it is. Because we're also going to interviews and people are not getting picked up. Mm-hmm. So, but we're seeing people get picked up in the streets.
Well, I know that the Trump administration has said their goal is to deport criminals. Government data shows that more than 60% of the people detained in at-large arrests since June have not had criminal convictions or pending charges. So, but I think what was interesting in this article was it talked about how it used to be. Sort of the typical way was that local jails would flag undocumented immigrants for removal and they would contact ICE. So basically, ICE was being contacted once the person was already apprehended for a crime. Yep. And so they would either serve their sentence and then be taken care of with ICE, or ICE would intervene earlier. But this at-large arrest is something that's very new, mm-hmm. which is where you have folks going into the grocery store, someone showing up for an immigration appointment, somebody picking their kids up from daycare. Those sorts of at-large arrests are very new. That's not what we've seen before.
Exactly. And they're people that don't have any criminal history or get picked up, or people that have very old criminal history. That's things like a DUI from 15 years ago.
Right. Well, in the Washington Post article, it said of the migrants who do have criminal convictions, and this is of the 79,000 people that ICE has arrested since October 1st, that a quarter of them were traffic offenses. So when they claim that there's a criminal conviction, it's not necessarily what we would think of as a crime.
Exactly. Yeah. These are not rapists and murderers. These are, frankly, what we're seeing is they're low-hanging fruit. They're people that ICE knows where they are because they're in some kind of process. They're already in proceedings. They're already applying for applications. And ICE needs to hit their 3,000 goal. And so they're picking people up because these are the people that they know where they are.
So they're trying to reach the target. It's more, well, we just need to do as many as possible because we're not going to reach the number that we're supposed to meet.
Exactly, which is the problem with these kinds of targets. That how are you going to hit 3,000 people in a day? You're going to pick the people that are easiest to find, which are the people that are already in some kind of a process.
It just seems to me that the environment that's being created is a human trafficker's dream, because they basically have so much more leverage over undocumented people to force them to work for little pay, to force them to work every day of the week, to force them just all kinds of criminal type activities with these folks, because the folks are going to be afraid to go to law enforcement because they're going to end up with ICE and they'll be part of that quota.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're not able to get a work permit, and you've got an employer who's telling you have to do this or I'm going to call ICE, and you're seeing masked people pulling people off the streets, yeah, that's a really scary and real threat. And that absolutely puts people at more risk for exploitation and trafficking, I mean, particularly labor trafficking.
And do we have labor trafficking in Alaska?
Yeah. We've seen it. We've seen people come from down south, flee up here to get safety. We've seen in the context of abusive relationships, where part of the abuse is you're going to work for my business. Part of the abuse is forcing someone to work. I get really nervous personally about any kind of business that's super isolated, where employees are dependent on their employer for housing, food, and everything else, because that just makes them ripe for exploitation. So yeah, Alaska, with our extreme isolation, is a place where people can be really vulnerable to exploitation.
I'm glad you painted that picture that way, because I think when I think of labor trafficking, I think of like a van with folks who don't speak English in it being pulled up to a construction site and them getting out and doing their work and getting back in the van and being driven away and being taken to some undisclosed location, and sort of like more organized, large scale. Mm-hmm. But in general, is it more individuals and individual specific situations that are being exploited?
I think that's what we're seeing up here. It might be different down south where you get big corporate farms and things like that. But here we have smaller industry. So we're going to see smaller kind of operations and individuals being trafficked.
A pushback that I hear a lot: why are you guys helping their words, quote, illegal immigrants? Mm-hmm. Why not help the legal immigrants? Mm-hmm. And I guess, what's your response to that comment?
I mean, I think my first response is we are helping people access benefits and rights that Congress has created for survivors of victimization. These are visas and ways to get green cards that Congress created because they were in line with the American ethos of people being safe and people being protected from violence. And our legal services help people find safety. It is incredible to me when you get somebody a green card and get somebody that stability, the difference that can make in their lives. And we've seen clients go from living at a shelter, not really sure what's going to happen with their lives, to starting businesses that employed people and provided services to U.S. citizens and paid taxes to the U.S. government, and becoming really integral parts of the American community because they had the right to be here. And it makes all of our communities safer when everybody is safe, because abusers, perpetrators target the most vulnerable people. And so if you leave those people vulnerable, they're going to get targeted, and it's going to put everybody in a more dangerous situation.
Is there anything that I didn't ask about that you wanted me to ask about?
I think common misconception in the immigration system is that it's fair. I think there's this belief that if you just work hard enough, if you just try hard enough, if you want it enough, then you'll get your papers. And that's not true. There are people who have been here for decades, who have worked hard, who have U.S. citizen children, who have paid taxes, who don't have criminal histories, who have just supported their families and been a part of their communities, and they still don't have a way to get status. And it's not because they don't want status, and it's not because they haven't tried. It's because their situation doesn't fit into one of the little buckets that Congress created to enable people to get status. So when people say, well, why don't you just do it the right way? There isn't a right way for some people. And that's not through fault of their own. That's because we have a system that was created by people that doesn't work. And systems that were created by people can be fixed by people if we had the political will.
Well, and I also think that there's this thing about, well, apply to become a U.S. citizen from abroad, and enter legally. How common is that, and how easy is that to do?
Yeah. If your parents are U.S. citizens and you're born abroad, then you might automatically be a U.S. citizen. Otherwise, you have to have been a lawful permanent resident in the United States for 3 to 5 years.
So you're going to have to get like some sort of visa to come here and work for a few years before you can apply.
Exactly. Yeah. So doing it from abroad.
So that's a misconception.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the best way for somebody who needs help to contact you guys?
Give us a call. So our phone number is 907-279-2457. The woman who answers our phones, Yvette, is wonderful and speaks English and Spanish. And we also have our language interpreter center. So if you don't speak English or Spanish, we have interpreters available. So we can get an interpreter easily.
And what's the process like if somebody, say for that example that I had earlier, the woman with the child, she's escaped an abusive relationship, does not have permission to be here. The shelter contacts you. Is she going to come in and meet with an attorney right away, or how does that usually unfold?
Yeah. So Yvette or whoever answers the phone will get some very basic information, contact information, a couple sentences on why you're calling. And then she will send that out to the attorneys to see who has the capacity to take the case. We mostly just want to make sure that we're not having people come in if we know that we're not going to be able to take the case. And then we'll set up an appointment with an attorney to meet with the person. And after meeting with the person and kind of getting all the information we need to figure out what the next, what we would be able to do for them, we take it to a staff meeting. We talk about the case, see if there's a grant that we could use to cover it, or if we would have to charge for it. And then we would call the person and let them know, what the next steps would be. If for some reason we're not able to take a case, we do make referrals.
What are some examples of cases that you don't take?
We don't take any employment-based cases, like the J1 visas that like the schools use to get teachers, the H visas. We don't do those.
Like people who are having trouble with those visas, or what would be an example of a call that you would get about one of those types of visas?
Or like if somebody called and said, I'm a skilled person and I want an employer to get me a visa to come to the U.S. We don't take that case.
Gotcha.
If somebody's having trouble with an employer, then that might be a human trafficking case we'd want to screen for. And then there's always capacity issues. If we're at a point where we don't think that we have the capacity to take a case, we will prioritize cases involving victimization. But for cases that don't involve victimization, if we don't have the capacity to take the case, we're going to refer them out because we don't want to have somebody come in and spend a bunch of time with us and give us a bunch of information, then have us say, oh, we don't have the capacity.
What's your capacity like right now, today?
We are taking some cases, but not every case. If you're a survivor of victimization, then it's important to tell us that so that we, like in that initial call, you don't need to go into details, but just to flag that for us so that we know to prioritize.
And you've mentioned grants a few times. How else do you get funding?
Donations, private donations.
And can you donate through your website?
Yes. Yep.
So akijp.org.
Yes. Yep. And right now we have a matching grant from the Murdoch Foundation. So if somebody new donates, they will match it. So that's always really exciting. And the donations are really important because they kind of fill the gaps where the grants don't.
Well, Anna Taylor, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. This was fun.
I referenced an article several times in today's conversation. It's called ICE Shift in Tactics Leads to a Soaring Number of At-Large Arrests. And it's by Mary Ann Levine, Emmanuel Martinez, and Alvaro Valino. It was published in the Washington Post on December 28, 2025, and republished in the Anchorage Daily News. You can find a link in the show notes. Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@aklight.gov or call 907-269-0123.